Hello everyone, this is Chris Callow, agronomist for the Calbaz Grow here in West Central Illinois. Today I want to spend a little time reviewing some information on some trials that I've been doing here the last 2 years, specifically looking at crown rot. So a little background first. In the fall of 2018, I remember walking several fields with growers at harvest time, and we were identifying issues with crown rot. And guys were looking at me for suggestions or recommendations on what to do to alleviate it. And much to my frustration, I really didn't have anywhere to turn nor any personal experience to really help guide them. So that's really what kind of drove the idea for me to start doing some work looking at this. Crown rot is caused by a fungal pathogen. I'd say likely Fusarium is the biggest one to blame, but occasionally Pythium is as well. The infection does happen early on in the corn plant's life, and then it manifests itself over time, and really we start to see the symptomology of it about the time that the plant is reaching physiological maturity, and then after towards harvest time. As the crown of that plant starts to deteriorate, the movement of water and nutrients from the roots into the plant gets progressively more limited. If you look there in that picture on the lower right, you can imagine how tough it is for a plant to move water and nutrients up through the roots and into that plant when the crown of that plant is totally dead and the stalk has started to deteriorate as well. And in severe cases, the movement can totally be shut off. All of this can result in premature death, or ghosting as we refer to it, of infected plants, which is kind of depicted there in the picture in the top right. Opportunistic stalk rots often set in after the plant is starting to deteriorate from crown rot, and then ultimately you have yield loss and standability issues. So as I started to design these trials, I wanted to target fields that I knew had a known history of crown rot, because I felt like that would give me the best chance of seeing some differences in these different treatments. We picked a susceptible hybrid to utilize in the trial with 2 different seed treatments: an elite seed treatment package, which has a high load fungicide, and then our basic seed treatment. Each hybrid and seed treatment combination got 2 different in-furrow fungicides used. Then we came back in on some of the passes and made a fungicide application at V5 or V6. And then occasionally some of the locations did have a VTR1 fungicide application for comparison as well. In 2020, I did add a more tolerant hybrid to the trial to get a hybrid comparison. And that hybrid also did have in-furrow applications and V5 applications made to it as well. So in 2019, I ended up with 12 or sometimes 24 treatments per location. The difference there being whether or not there was a VTR1 fungicide application. And then in 2020, the number of treatments went up to either 18 or 36 per location. Truth be told, actually in 2019, there was 1 other seed treatment and 1 other fungicide in furrow, but I'm not including them in this data summary because they were not carried forward into 2020. A couple pictures here. The top center there is the delivery system for the fungicide in furrow, which is coming from FurrowJet. Top right is the picture of the planter that used in all of these trials, and then there's a screenshot of a as-planted map. All locations in this trial were corn on corn. I'll also call out that I did have a couple other locations in both years that I lost due to water damage. Now let's take a peek at some of the yield data here from these trials. In this slide, I've got 3 different buckets of data depicted in the bars. You see the no VT there on the left, the with VT in the center. So those 2 are the data comparisons of 3 different locations across the 2 years. And the only difference between those bars, or those groups of bars, is the VT fungicide application. And then there on the right, you see the overall average of all of the different tactics in that cluster of bars. So really, just to summarize this data set quickly, I guess 4 things I want to call your attention to. If you look at the difference between the VT and the no VT bars, if you average all those out, there's a little over a 9 bushel spread between those 2, meaning that a VT application added just over 9 bushel advantage in my trial work. And then there in the right cluster of bars, you see 3 red circles. The circle on the left is calling out the Elite seed treatment advantage at 4.1 bushel over the basic. The center red circle is calling out the V5 fungicide application over the Check, which is a 3.3 bushel advantage. And then the right circle is calling out the yield advantage of ProLine, which was just under 5 bushel to the acre. I think it's pertinent as we look at these management options to look at the return on investment. So what I've got graphed here is the blue line is depicting the yield gain of each management tool over the Check, plotted against the z-axis on the right-hand side of the chart. The gold bar represents the cost per acre of that particular treatment option. And then the green bar is depicting the net income on a per acre basis based on the yield gain and the cost of the system. So in this case, Elite seed treatment added 4.1 bushel to the acre. Its cost is roughly $4.60 an acre, and so it netted us about $11.80 an acre for that treatment choice based on my data set. So you can see that both the V5 and VT fungicide applications did both provide a positive net income on a per acre basis. When you look at the ProLine and the Luna Privilege data, the ProLine data does provide a nice net income based on my data, and the Luna Privilege did not because it did not provide a yield benefit. I did an estimate of the cost on Luna Privilege because technically it's not labeled for use in corn, but we were able to use it for research purposes to look at its benefit. Another element of this trial work that I wanted to look at was what impact were each of these management tactics having on the infection rates in these trials. So in order to do that, we walked these plots prior to harvest and took ratings on the percentage of ghosted plants, or in some cases, the amount of plants that shattered with doing the kick test. Here I am graphing the results of those pre-harvest ratings, and again I have them categorized in 3 different buckets. The no VT fungicide bucket on the left, the with VT fungicide bucket in the center, and again that is looking at 3 locations across the 2 years. And then the overall average ratings on the right-hand side, which takes into account 5 locations across 2 years worth of data. So in this case, the lower the bar, the better. And generally speaking, you see the inverse of the yield. So the with VT fungicide application bucket, those bars are generally lower than the no VT fungicide bucket. And then when you look over there to the right-hand side on the overall average, the basic seed treatments and no V5 fungicide treatments all have slightly taller bars than some of the other ones. So maybe this is a cleaner way to look at this data. If we compare the basic seed treatment versus Elite seed treatment, Elite had a 28% reduction in the infection rate over basic. Now that's not the difference between the two, that's the reduction. V5 fungicide application showed a 10% reduction in the amount of infected plants. The ProLine and Luna Privilege data is a little bit head-scratching to me because it doesn't align with what we saw in the yield data. So in the yield data, ProLine showed a nice yield advantage and Luna Privilege did not, and that's about the opposite of what we saw with the reduction in the infection rates. So I averaged the two together to come up with a 13% reduction in the infection rate for the in-furrow products. The 3 locations that I had the VT fungicide comparisons at, the VT fungicide showed a 30% reduction in the infection rate. And then this year, in the 2020 data, when I included what we refer to as a more tolerant hybrid, we showed a 33% reduction in the infection rates of that more tolerant hybrid over the more susceptible hybrid. To wrap this up, here's a few key takeaways I'd like to leave you with. First and foremost, there are absolutely no silver bullets when it comes to trying to manage crown rot. We are starting to identify how some of the tools we have available can help us alleviate the problem, but they will not eliminate it by no means. Sometimes these tools can look like they're not helping at all. I can cite examples where I've got a hybrid that I would consider more tolerant with a in-furrow fungicide and a V5 fungicide application and still having up to 50% infection rates. The trend in my data does definitely suggest that the more tools we deploy, the greater the impact we can have on alleviating the pain. I've brought in some of the yield data here just to show that, for example, that when you've got elite seed treatment and fungicide in furrow and V5 fungicide, that's where your higher yield gains are at. And when you start pulling away some of those treatment options and going down to just the basic treatment, those treatment options tend to fall towards the bottom. I also believe that there are more people paying attention to crown rot, and so we will likely come up with other ideas and suggestions at ways to alleviate the pain in the near future. But we're also likely going to find more problems from it because we have more people paying attention to it as well. And at the end of the day, crown rot is associated with various stresses in addition to a fungal pathogen. So identifying and alleviating any of those other stresses may help us reduce the loss from crown rot. Drainage and fertility management are two quick examples of other stresses that may be helping accentuate the stresses from crown rot. And with that, I thank you for sticking with me till the end. I realize this video was a little bit on the long side, but there was a lot to cover and to discuss. I have a lot of people that I would like to thank. I'm not going to call them out by name, but I have many plot cooperators and several other folks that have enabled me to be successful in being able to carry out these trials, and I thank each and every one of you for helping me do that. If you happen to have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.